Hello, everyone. Ben and I are back again for another episode of, I was going to say paranormal, strange encounters down under. And how are you, Ben?
I'm very well. How are you today, Cheryl?
Oh, good. And it's our pleasure to introduce to you our good friend and colleague, Suzy Hansen, who is a UFO research colleague and who's written a book entitled The Dual Soul Connection, the Agenda for Human Advancement, which combines her own close encounter experiences with a scientific examination by emeritus astrophysicist Dr. Rudy Schulz from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in the USA, which I think is quite unique in UFO research, to have a book written by an experiencer and then have a scientist analyse it. Don't you think, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we really need to see happening in this field, and there should certainly be more of it.
Yeah. So welcome, Suzy.
Thank you, Cheryl and Ben. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So today we're going to talk about paranormal factors relating to close encounters with non-human intelligences or extraterrestrials. And so we're going to be looking at all the strange things that happen in those that are reported during those close encounter experiences. And Suzy, I have to say that the title of your book, or at least the first part of it, The Dual Soul Connection, I mean, that immediately smacks of the paranormal. So why don't you tell us what you mean by dual soul, and is it paranormal?
It's not actually paranormal, although it may sound that way. It's actually to do with the combining of the consciousness of a human, or the soul that has incarnated into a human, and the consciousness of a living grey. And this sounds very unusual, but we have scientists and psychologists now talking about split souls, dual souls, souls that are functioning in different places at one time, parallel universes, and all kinds of other things that do sound like over the edge material. But in actual fact, these are scientists, psychologists talking about this and looking at the potential of it. And it just so happens that a lot of experiencers have experienced this in their contacts, where they've been shown and told things not only about themselves, as I was, but about other people and other souls on a planet, and how this integration of consciousness takes place. Because that's what I'm really talking about when I talk about the dual soul, is two consciousnesses joined together and able to cooperate with each other in a sense, and it allows the human to tap into that hive mind that a lot of experiencers talk about on occasions, when there is a need to do that, or when something is triggered in their life.
Right. But there are, like in your case, I am, or in cases of other people too who report close encounters, there are often intertwined in those experiences are really strange paranormal experiences, like poltergeist activity. They can have apocalyptic dreams after their experiences. I don't know if that's paranormal, but I know that I've spoken to a few people who've said that portals have opened, or it looks like a portal has opened in the middle of the room. There was a lady I spoke to who was in hospital on I think it was a second story, and she could see the floor and the walls seeming to disappear underneath her and around her, so she could actually see below her. And, you know, witnesses floating through locked doors and windows and things disappearing, then reappearing. And I'm sort of wondering, you know, is this really paranormal, or is it like the byproducts and side effects of technology of an advanced civilization that's manifesting in front of people.
Well, you've covered quite a few things there, so I'm just going to pick on a couple that I can recall immediately. The first thing is, I think that where experiencers, abductees are concerned, many of them have had lifelong experiences. So if we just look at those people who've had the lifelong experiences as I have, I think that from a very early age, they've had their consciousness expanded simply by exposure to advanced technology, physics that we don't understand yet on board the craft, telepathy, telekinesis, and all of those kinds of psychic and kinetic abilities that they have been taught to do on the craft from childhood. And many of those things, once they're opened up in our abilities, they're there. They are latent in us anyway. And this kind of contact with an advanced species is naturally going to escalate your understanding of it and escalate your ability to use it to keep up with them and be able to communicate with them. And especially in childhood, when you hear of experiencers like myself and many others who talk about being taught things on a craft, like a kind of school that you attend on various nights where you are taught these abilities. So once that opens up in you, it's really then a case of you having to assimilate that into your life, earthly life here on the planet. And secondly, you also have to learn to cope with it and close it off if need be. Psychic abilities, when you open up too quickly, as many mediums and yogis and all kinds of people who go into meditation and all kinds of other Eastern, shall we say, belief systems and practices, you often find that people are overwhelmed by it quite quickly. So I think that from childhood, you learn these things. As a child, you learn to cope with it. And I know I've heard many experiencers say that at school, at their normal school here on Earth, they very quickly learn not to talk about these things. So they learn to deal with it, how to hide it, how to conceal it, etc. Because in our society, a lot of these things have not been acceptable. But these days, they are becoming more acceptable. So not only do you have this opening up through being taught these wondrous things that are latent in all of us, but also you have the technological aspect that you mentioned that crosses over in so many ways on a craft, where you have technology that is basically powered by consciousness or utilized through your consciousness. So this is another way that humans being exposed to these things open up to these abilities, I guess. So right from childhood, you may be experiencing, as I did, precognition, seeing spirits, orbs of light coming through the air or through the walls, and as you said, portals or big caverns of light with entranceways appearing to like a magical mystery tour opening in your bedroom, and you're being invited by greys or whatever species you're having contact with to go with them and step into that. So that kind of becomes second nature to you, and you have to then learn how to deal with the disbelief of society around you.
That's a lot to manage, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, that's a real challenge for people, for sure. Do you think that these let's call them faculties, I guess, or latent faculties that people have, could it be purely being activated by being in close proximity to exotic technology?
I think so, because I've seen people, humans on board craft who can operate this technology, or who we're often told on a craft to expand our consciousness when we are going into a room where this kind of technology may be. That enables us to open up, so to speak, to be able to understand and pick up aspects of that technology and how it is used, but also opening up to the abilities and the telepathic abilities that many of these entities have, who can convey telepathy to you in a multitude of forms that you need to learn and be able to access at the time. I think, though, that you mentioned before about physics, etc. And I think these days scientists are now coming out of the woodwork. And I've always said for decades now that we need to get science on board in this particular subject. And as time went by, I began to realize, speaking overseas and talking to some of the scientists that were attending UFO conferences, that in fact scientists have been there all the time, in the background, quietly doing work, quietly accessing material, working in universities with grants and private research. So these people now, I guess, have a kind of permission to come out with what they know and what they've discovered. And certainly recently, since the report came out in the States on the naval UFO sightings, and a lot of the work being done by some of the whistleblowers and people who've retired from governmental positions in the US, I think this has given scientists permission, and we've seen a lot of people coming out saying, this is what I believe, this is what I've experienced, etc. And also a lot of the things in the past that experiencers may have seen as paranormal, or people they've spoken to may have viewed as simply paranormal, we have a greater understanding of now, simply because of our advances in physics, but also our advances in understanding how the human brain works. And I know that there's been a lot of research in universities in the States on mind mapping and mind videos, etc. And really, when I first saw the work that they were doing and read about it, I knew immediately that this is what I've seen happening on the craft. And they are trying to develop ways in which humans can access and develop these capabilities with our innate ability to do that. So really, science is beginning to catch up with what many mediums and clairvoyants have said about paranormal things, how it's all part of one continuum and it is all to do with consciousness. And these catch-ups are happening at a very fast rate now, which is very corroborative for experiencers.
Yeah. I was reading the other day, actually I was doing some preparation for a presentation of my own, and it was about hypnotizability of subjects. And the research was actually the result of a study undertaken, and it was saying that people who've I found a link between levels of hypnotizability or ability to be hypnotized relating to people who've had near-death experiences. And the study found that people who were more easily hypnotizable were having would tend to report near-death experiences. And I'm just wondering, and I know that happens with, there's a link between people who report near-death experiences and close encounter experiences. So I'm wondering, is it a different part of the brain that is activated or has been developed, to put it that way, through our lives that makes those individuals, I guess, say, easier, I haven't got it out yet, to have contact with non-human intelligences?
I really don't think so, because we interview people who say that they have absolutely no memory of any kind of contact, any kind of paranormal experience whatsoever, but then suddenly out of the blue they have this amazing face-to-face contact. And they don't want to believe it, they can't believe it, because it doesn't fit with anything else in their life. So there's two questions here. Is this a person who for some reason, as many in the contact field talk about, has suddenly had this trigger occasion where something has triggered this awareness or this contact, or is it just simply they were in the right place at the wrong time, or have they had contact all their life and it's time for them to wake up to it and they are put under pressure with an unforgettable experience? So I'm not sure which of those is the correct one, because I've interviewed a lot of people and talked to them who could fit into any of those categories, and perhaps all of those are being utilised by the ETs at this time to bring us into a greater state of awareness as a civilization.
Even a simple sighting could trigger it, couldn't it? Like it doesn't have to be something coming through your walls, but you could see an object that's appearing and manifesting to you, and then bang, the switches are flicked.
Yes, and I know that on one occasion on craft, we were told, a group of humans I was with were told that those who do public speaking in the future from this particular group we were learning how to utilize words, phrases, and even vocal intonation that would trigger people. And I've had people come up to me after speeches and say, when you said this, it was like this whole thing opened up in my head and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So this is another utilization of a psychic capacity, or something to do with consciousness that is able to go to one person and activate them at a time that it's needed. And I've seen the ETs do this on craft, where they may have a number of people in front of them, and the whole time they are conveying material to you, they are actually assessing who's absorbing it, who's misspits out, who's hasn't quite got the gist of it. And at the end of the meeting, they will just simply send out this multiple telepathy that goes to each person who needs to be brought up to speed on what they missed out, and it's just put into your mind and it assimilates into what they've told you. We can't even imagine what that kind of ability would be like to have, and the spirituality or the ethics to be able to use it well and wisely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you're located in New Zealand, but you've been over here and stayed with me a few times when you've spoken to our UFO group. And one time I couldn't go because I just had knee surgery, and I know Barry Taylor picked you up, took you over to the where we're having our meeting. And when you came home, you said, that a couple of the overhead street lights had popped as you drove by, and this is really not uncommon at all for people who've had close encounters. And so, why do you think that happens? I often have people who tell me those sorts of experiences.
Yes, and I've heard a lot of that myself, and as to whether that was a coincidence, I'm not sure, but this sort of thing does happen. I had a TV crew at my place, and as soon as I started speaking, all their equipment blew, and it took a couple of hours for them to scurry around getting the right stuff to fix it. But yes, this does happen, and I'm not sure whether it's some kind of psychic energy that you build up, or something that you're emanating, something you're attracting. I'm not sure about that. But I do recall having 2 New Zealand experiences stay at my place, and we were busy talking for about 2 hours about the Kaikoura Lights experiences in the Gisborne Flat, where a lot of the first New Zealand contact with the Greys began to emerge. And we 3 had been involved in that down in the Gisborne area when we were living there. And the more we talked, the more you could feel like the air around us. It was like you could get a knife out of the door and cut through the air. It became so thick and electric. And then the 3 of us nearly jumped out of our skin, because all of the fuses and the lights and all the power points along the side of the house where we were sitting blew, with a lot of exploding. And the caravan plug that was plugged into the exterior wall near where 2 of us were sitting had melted into its mount. So there has to be something said for the energy that builds up around experiencers, and maybe what they've been taught to do with that energy that we don't necessarily do down here in this denser atmosphere.
And maybe, like you say, with the change of consciousness, that affects our physical electrical system, which then interferes with systems around us too.
That's right, yes.
But there's also other types of things that happen, because I remember, and I've said this on one episode before, I think earlier with Ben, was that a gentleman I went to interview in a place here in Brisbane called Fortitude Valley. He'd been out with friends and they were having coffee and cake, and as he was holding his fork, the prongs on the fork began to curl up, right, just in front of everyone's eyes. And then when he went home, he went to put his door key in key holder and the key lock. And he said it just melted like butter. It was just so soft. So I think that there's something really amazing that is happening with people who've had these experiences. And I do think that certain elements of our authorities are very interested in that.
I think so too, Cheryl. Judging from my own experience, I think they're very interested in that. And I think that there will be groups in the future, interested parties, I'll put in inverted commas to put it politely, who may be really wanting to find out just how much we do know, because let's face it, there's a lot of experiencers who will tell you so much but not everything. Sometimes people hold things back for a whole variety of reasons, and I've actually done that myself, in that in my first book that I put out, I'm writing my second now, but in the first one I didn't go into the hybrid production of children on board the craft, etc., and my own experience in that, meeting children on the craft that were mine, and holding other babies right from a very young age on craft. I didn't go into that, but I will be going into that more in my next book. And I think that's a huge part of what we're talking about, in that in order to produce hybrid children, there's a great deal that they need to know about the way we function and our brain, how we operate, and especially how we react to things. And I think that many experiencers have a great sensitivity and compassion, and I'm not saying that all humans don't have that, but because of course we do. But from a very early age, many experiencers talk about communicating with animals, being able to know when a person is not telling the truth, or when what they're thinking doesn't match what they're saying. So a lot of these abilities kind of shine through from an early age. And then when you get to adulthood or young adulthood, you have to reassess that. And I went through a period of about 10 years of reassessing how I was going to bring this into my adult life, and the fact that I then had children of my own, etc., how this all fitted together, and whether or not I wanted to follow that road of the psychic development. And I actually did. I joined Spiritual Society, and I took meditation classes, although I no longer do that. But I tried out a lot of different things, really in an attempt to find other people like me that I could talk to freely. And I recall the first time that I actually met someone like me was at a Tauranga Harvey Cook's UFO meetings. And he had a young man come along who'd been in Canada working in a restaurant in the snow, and went outside to put the rubbish out, and saw a light approaching, passed out or was knocked out by the light, and had a period of missing time. And he talked at the meeting, and it felt to me as if he and I were the only people in the room, because there seemed to be this buzz or chatter on some level happening between us. Even though I was hiding right down the back, listening intently, it was as if, we were on a same wavelength and had this understanding. It was like I'd known him all my life, but I'd never even spoken to him. And I've had that happen on other occasions as well. So there is this recognition amongst experiencers that of people who have similar abilities or consciousness.
So what do you think gets you or anyone onto a ship in the first place? What is the criteria, do you think, that they're looking for? Another interesting, downloading different levels of information and seeing whether it sticks or not. It's not a pass or fail type of a process on board a craft.
No, and I've written about that quite extensively in my book. Like in our institutions and education, not so much now, but in the past it was you pass or you fail, and there were terrible emotions often associated with that. But on the craft, it's about learning, and it's about assessments, but the assessments are very positive and constructive. And if people don't complete a project, or it's not quite up to scratch, you never get that feeling like you failed or it's not up to scratch. It's like, okay, that's really great. We've found that this isn't your area of skill, but in doing this, we've isolated that this one is. We're now moving you into this program, so that you have these multi-layered levels of programs that to educate humans on board craft from a very young age, from birth. And there's a sense of excitement and achievement and positivity that people feel when they do these tests and assessments. And there's not that feeling of failure. It's a feeling of refining and defining what you're good at and finding your niche, which is what we really need to be doing here.
It's been a while since I've read your book, but I seem to remember you talking about was it the souls of beings appearing of balls of light or different colours?
Yep.
Can you explain a bit more about that?
Okay, well, when I was 8, I was taken into a room on a craft with the entity, grey entity that I called the grandfather, because that was how he really treated me, in almost a grandfatherly way, very loving and very patient, very feeling of being very old and wise. And I'm not saying that poetically to make it sound all great and wonderful, but to me as a child, that was how I identified him. So I was taken into this room, and I was told that I'd been given a whole lot of information about 6 months before about the program I was going to be in, and the 3 waves of souls that were part of this program, where I fitted into it. Much of that didn't make too much sense to me. It was as I got older and I began recalling more about that information that it began to make sense to me. But on this occasion, I was put in a room, and they brought in, another grey brought in, this trail of wonderful coloured lights, ranging from small to so big, all different colours and hues. And they came in, and I likened them to a string of party balloons coming into the room. And they just hung in the air, and there was one in particular, a blue ball of light, which I'd already met and been told was going to be the soul of my son in adulthood. When I finally had a child, it would be him. And I was told these balls of light were souls, some of whom had already incarnated on the planet, so they were older than me, and some who had not incarnated yet, and they would be younger than me. But they would all play a part in my life and be important in assisting me in the things that I needed to do in life on this planet. And then he said, I'm going to leave you to get to know them, and walked out. And I got quite tearful because I wasn't sure what to do. But slowly, one by one, they just came towards me and hung in front of me. And at that moment, into my mind, they were able to project images, snippets of conversation, scenes, etc., that related to their life or their future life. Now, don't tell me how you can do that, accessing the future, but if we're looking at a stream of consciousness that has no beginning and no end, basically, then I guess it was all in there somewhere. So I was shown some faces, and I know I recognised in later life 2 of those faces. One of them was Dr. Rudy Schild, who contributed to my book, and the other was Graham Opie, my dear friend and colleague who passed away with cancer in 2015, who had worked with me in New Zealand UFO sightings for 20 years. So he indeed had contributed greatly to the subject, but also to assisting me and being my greatest right-hand man. So that's the kind of thing that you experience on a craft, and that really opened things up to me in terms of knowing what a soul was. So very young as a child, I had an understanding of what a soul was. Perhaps not the most perfect understanding, but it was something I thought about, which most children that age probably wouldn't. and the abilities that that we have, the ability that the soul has. And my grandmother was a psychic. There's the familial thing again, and she used to talk to me about the soul as a child and tell me that balls of light came into her room at night and talked to her and reassured her and kept her going, because she had severe rheumatoid arthritis and had had both legs amputated and was bedridden in those days with very little medication available. So, you know, there are these things that may be seen as some people as magical, to the extent that people think that you are making it up or it's not real. Or you can look at them as something that opens you up to greater possibilities of the universe.
Mm. While you were talking, I was thinking, what are some of the types of paranormal things that people have reported to you over the years?
Things like, as you mentioned before, being able to see spirits, seeing people's auras, being able to communicate with animals. But then if we move on into the experiencers, you've got the portals opening, you've got people being told, basically given some warning or message that they are to go to a particular place or spot, and they don't know why, but the feeling that they have to do it is overwhelming. So they get in the car and off they go, and then it's out in the wop somewhere, and they have a contact, or they see a craft and they get a message, or they get something through consciousness. And people are very wary about talking about this because, you know, it's not well understood by many in our society. But these are the kinds of things that they talk about. Also, things that disappear. For example, an experiencer in Auckland had a sighting and a close encounter and with entities on a lonely beach. She was an advanced medic, so a very balanced and down-to-earth person. She took some photos before she went into some kind of altered state and didn't remember anymore. And these were on her cell phone. And after the incident, she found that her house was being watched. Other people around her had noticed it and told her. She was a volunteer fire brigade member, so other fire brigade members at the club, when they were having practice nights, had told her that they'd seen a car tailing her. And on the first occasion that she went to the fire station after this incident, she had her pager, her medical pager, and her phone on her front seat, and the phone disappeared. Now, did someone break into the car and leave no sign of them breaking in? I'm sure that's possible. Or was it somehow rather disintegrated and put elsewhere? And that leads me on to other experiencers who've talked about their body and their car being relocated. And a young woman who's actually the daughter of a very good friend of mine in the States, they're both experiencers, she was about to have an accident. It was quite clear that within seconds she might die. And the next thing she knew, her car was 2 blocks away on the side of the road. She was no longer in that position. Her car just somehow vanished from one place and reappeared instantaneously in another. She was in shock. She was very grateful for whatever did this, but she was completely messed up and shocked and calling her family, and they actually had to go and get her because she was so shocked she couldn't drive, but it saved her life. And I would consider this young woman and others like her to be instrumental in the future at what I call the third wave, the younger people in their 30s probably now, early 40s, late 20s, who will take us into the future. So clearly she has a role to play, and her life was saved, as mine has been on several occasions. It's just some amazing intervention has happened that has stopped dead the potential for me to die within seconds, minutes, or hours. So how do we explain this?
It's very hard to explain, that's for sure. It just means that it's clearly not your time, and also that there's others out there who agree it's not your time, and we have to do something about this to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Yes, and I was leading on from what Cheryl also said is I was reading up on some information and papers that have been written by psychologists overseas about people like myself. And back in 2009, there was one in particular that was printed in Spain at a university, published by 3 writers, professors, and it was very negative about and very narrow about what experiencers are really like. And the consensus seemed to be that that we are all mentally unstable, and that, you know, we're not trustworthy, we're fantasy prone, we have all kinds of problems that that are unsolvable, and really we shouldn't be listened to. And you would think that over the years, with the amount of books that have come out, the amount of scientists now involved in it, even psychologists involved in the subject, and many psychologists, doctors and specialists who are experiencers themselves, you would think that that opinion might have changed, but we're still struggling. And I looked at something printed in 2014, another paper by intellectuals and academics, and basically repeating the same rhetoric that that we can't be trusted, and that our senses and our memories are fake, or that we are faking them. So, you know, we've got a lot of bridges to cross in the future with the paranormal side of our experiences, as well as the ET side, because really now that's in terms of what we now understand, for people like ourselves, those 2 areas are coming closer together. The paranormal and the ET are sort of melded together. But for many people, they're totally separate, and they become they're easy targets to discredit both of them. And there's no understanding of how they mesh together. In incidents such as the Oz factor, which many experiencers experience during their contacts, where they are put into an altered state, and they may be able to see things that other people can't see. They may have semi-paralysis or full paralysis, except for the movement of the eyes, and they may experience missing time. They may see mists. They may see things emerging from those mists. They may be taken on board craft. There's a whole raft of things that can happen in that Oz factor state. And is that paranormal, or is that the side of physics that the ETs have mastered and we have not? And we are simply the go-betweens telling the rest of the world what we know and what we've seen.
Mm.
Yeah, and being ridiculed for it, which is the sad thing, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
is.
Some of the experiences that have been told to me, or the paranormal side of it, like some of them are a little bit dark and quite frightening for people. And I'm just thinking of one at the moment. Was it happened in about 2014, where a young woman woke up to see something slither out of her room. And she looked at the window and saw this blackness with multicolored stars in it. And she screamed at it a few times, so she knew she was awake, even though her dog remained asleep. And she said whatever she was seeing was the same size as her dog, which was a small to average sized dog. And the blackness was floating at window height. She couldn't see through it, but on the bottom it sort of tapered off, like, you know, the Casper the Ghost cartoon.
Yep.
And she saw it for 15 seconds, and it moved through the closed window and disappeared. And you know, she said that like she'd had close encounter experiences. Her father had told her that he'd seen a spaceship when he was sitting on the balcony. And when he told her that, more memories of her own experiences started flooding back from her own younger life, where she saw a tall person in the backyard, who she would often see in her teens. So I guess what I'm going to ask you is, have you seen, like, the more people hear about these experiences from their own family members, is there sort of like a realization moment for them that they go, oh, well, there really is something in this. I'm not crazy. Something's going on, but what the heck is it?
Yes. So we're talking about those triggers again that can wake people up and make you really think about things and stop passing it over and pushing it down and forgetting about it and busying yourself so you don't have to think about it. I think all my life, from as far back as I can remember, I have been a medium. Now, I don't like, as I've said before, to use that word because it's got baggage and connotations in society. But basically what I'm saying is from early childhood, I was able to see and communicate with spirit people. And when I listen to a lot of people today who talk about their experiences and don't have a lot of information about them to impart, but what they do impart sometimes to me sounds more like spirit contact than ET contact. But there's a huge New Age community out there, and I find personally that many of them want to have ET contact. It's almost like I don't know what drives people. I've had people come up to me and basically plead with me that next time I go on a craft, can I please tell the ETs their name and that they would like to go on a craft and see what it's like, and it just doesn't work like that. And so I wonder sometimes if people who are opening up to other realities or opening up to a spiritual path or new information that about these kinds of paranormal things that they've never considered before, I wonder if they attract entities in the spirit world and entities that reside in the ether around our planet. And I've said many times, I'm not just talking about spirits here of people who've departed. I'm talking about other entities that look quite different to that, and this might include, the big blanket of darkness or dark things slithering or whatever. Not wanting to sound like it's all spooky or anything, but there are these things out there, and people sometimes want to dabble in the paranormal just for the fun of it or the heck of it, and get themselves into deep trouble, and then mediums like myself have to go and work with them to clean it all up, if I can put it that way. The church might call it exorcism. So I think that as people develop more and more and gain some more experience, then hopefully discernment kicks in and they begin to recognize or understand or learn about what it is they're seeing. It's not always ET that is associated with paranormal, of course. There's many other things. And I can give you an example. I was sitting in my living room once when I was in my 30s, and my father had passed away some months beforehand, and I wasn't really that close to him, so I wasn't even thinking about him. And he appeared standing in front of me on the little step in the living room and was busy talking to me and smoking his cigarette. And then he suddenly ducked and said, "What the hell was that?" And fluttering past him, I will swear, was a fairy. Now, I had never ever in my life seen a fairy before. To me, a fairy as a child was something mythological or magical or something I read about in my storybooks. But I saw this and I know what it looked like and what it was doing and how beautiful it was. And here we have a spirit talking to me who recognizes this, who sees this thing going past him. So at that moment in time, the three of us, the fairy, the spirit of my father and I, were all enmeshed in the same patch of consciousness and sensitivity. So there are a lot of things out there that belong to other realms, and we in the future will define whether we consider them ET or whether we consider them residents of our planet like us.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe some of these extraterrestrials can traverse those realms easily and go across them whereas we don't.
Yes, and that's evidenced by what I talked about earlier as a child, with these souls who'd come on board craft, had left their bodies, those who were incarnated left their bodies at night, and those that had not yet incarnated were able to bring themselves into that room on that craft. And, experiencers talk about taking on different forms. A ball of light, traveling as a ball of light, traveling in our body, traveling as a grey or another species, but knowing that the consciousness within us is still us and something else combined. And that's what I talk about, the dual soul.
And Ben, I just want to ask you too, in your area, have you had people report close encounters with paranormal events intertwined through them?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I remember, and I thought of this at the start of this episode, was I had met a gentleman who lived down near Warrigal, which is just out of Melbourne, and he had told me about a pattern of events that he had with which actually had started when he was out getting firewood, and he saw a grey standing next to a tree, and he said it was the most. He was scared at that point in time, and he started to methodically pack everything up and away back into his car, and the grey stood by the tree watching him as he was packing up, and he hopped in his car and he drove away because he couldn't really believe what he was seeing. And then he reported also, like we spoke about earlier, whenever he being affected by affecting electricity. So if he walked along, a street light would go out, come back on again, or go off, or a series of street lights would go off. So yes, that's something that I've seen in reports that have come to me. And even like I was also reviewing the Kelly Cahill case that was here in August 1993, and there was a whole heap of associative paranormal stuff that she had around her experiences with objects appearing and disappearing, communication through that came into her head and things like that. So yeah, it's all very interconnected. And what I find really interesting is that you seem to have one group of people that can have a high level, intense encounter with alien beings, and like a short example would be Travis Walton. And then on the other hand, you've got a whole heap of experiences that are having ongoing connection and, as you say, lifetime experience. So it seems like you can potentially have either of those experiences or no experience. So I sort of was wondering what Suzy thought about people who seem to have one encounter as opposed to people who have this ongoing connection and all their psychic abilities.
Yeah, well, two replies to that. The first one would be the contact scene in the United States is an entity in itself. It's kind of self-perpetuating, and it's very different from, well, not very different, but there are marked differences between some of the things that the people in the States report and what the rest of the world reports. And I really don't think that many in the States actually realize that or recognize it, because on occasions when I have spoken in the States, I've had people come up to me afterwards and say, I had no idea that people in other countries were having contact experiences. I thought this was just an American thing. And because America is so big, and there's any amount of fuel for conferences and conference speakers and experiencers, and that it's like it's a great machine on its own, and it doesn't need the rest of the world to keep it going. But it has developed along a certain track, which in some ways is not healthy, and in some ways does not align with other countries that have contact experience. So I've forgotten the major bit of your question now.
Well, the point I was saying was that there's people who have these ongoing connections and,
That's right.
and spiritual connections and all strange. Yeah. Then you have a group of people who will have one event, and then nothing ever happens again.
Yeah, well, there's lots of, if you look at the three waves or the three groups that I describe in my book, the middle group, the communicators, that's the one I'm in, is a finite group. Finite in the sense that no one's still incarnating into it. We're all here. And it's a huge group worldwide. It's the biggest group at any one time. And I explain to people, they say to me, can you please tell me what you think my task in life is? Because I'm ready to do it. I want to do it. I've been studying all the spiritual things, and I feel I'm ready to contribute, but I don't know what to do. And I say, well, we're all cogs in a wheel, and some people have been assigned a larger cog, some a smaller cog, medium size or whatever. But when it comes to your turn to turn, you will know about it. You will be compelled. You will not be able to stop it. You will be drawn and dragged to do what it is you need to do. And until then, lead a good life, recycle, eat organic, all of that stuff. Be a good citizen of the planet, and wait and be patient. Don't try to make it happen. You'll go up a dead end alley. Just live a good life. And when you're supposed to do your bit, you'll do it. And your bit might just be one big experience that goes worldwide and hits people in the face for a while or for a long period of time. Or it may be that you have lifelong experiences, and not many people ever hear about you because you're in a remote little country or way up in the mountains somewhere, but whatever, you have a time where you can put your stuff out. And I think that's what I've done. I've written a book, I'm writing another one, done public speaking. My name is not in lights, and I don't care. I don't want it in lights. Just want to put my story out there, and if anyone can benefit from reading it, that's good. So it just depends on what your purpose is, I believe, Ben, what you've come here to do, what your job is, and that's how it will come to you. Be it big or small, it's all part of the picture.
That sort of sounds a bit like some people are sleepers in society. They're peppered through society and they're sleepers. And sometimes they're activated and sometimes they're not. They're waiting. And I know some of those people have said to me, I know I've got a mission. I know I'm supposed to be doing something, but I don't know what it is.
Yep.
It's so common.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of my speeches I did through Australia was called Waking the Sleepers. And, I've been on the craft when the ETs have talked about some of you are going to start work soon, or some of you it's going to be in a decade or so, and some of you we're just putting to sleep basically, and you'll wake up much later on when all hell is letting loose, and you'll have one specific thing to do, and it will be important, will be part of something, and if you fail, then others will fail. So they talked all the time, they talked about commitment.
Suzy,
that was the word that was the most important thing that I recall from all of my experiences, is commitment to the task.
Do you think that everybody's on the same wheel and the same task, or are there different aliens with different agendas using different people in different ways?
Well, even with the Greys that I've been in contact, there's multiple levels. I talk about the multi-leveled programs for education, multi-level programs for raising consciousness, and multi-level programs for people being activated and doing something that's useful and meaningful. So yes, in answer to your question, there are multiple levels being enacted at one time. But yes, there are other agendas. I explain one agenda. It is one agenda that I am familiar with, but other people talk about other agendas that are darker, that are more sinister, that are not positive or constructive. And I do recall on one occasion, and I mentioned it in my book, where the Greys were asked by a human amongst us about other ETs visiting the planet, and they said yes, there are other ETs, and yes, there is another agenda that is not a positive one, and they are having to deal constantly with that particular race or species. So that's an acknowledgement from them that that there's competition out there, and that competition may not be beneficial to humanity.
Interesting. So many questions I want to ask or things to bring up for discussion. And I've heard some pretty amazing, crazy sounding stories, although I believed most of them. of what people have reported. And I remember some people might be aware, and this has been around in the UFO community now for a while, on the USS Nimitz encounter in 2004, that the senior radar operator at the time on the Princeton was a man by the name of Kevin Day. And after he had, he was talking about objects that were anomalous aerial vehicles that the military had been seeing, for days and days. He described them as watching them on the display was like watching snowfall from the sky. But after that incident, he started to have strange dreams, and the end of world dreams consisting of things like tsunamis and earthquakes, forest fires, tidal waves, floods, etc. And they all left him with the feeling of, we need to prepare for what's coming. And I had a lot of people contact me during the 90s, particularly who'd had what we now term as alien abduction experiences. And they were shown, they said that they were taken to places where they were shown these images on screens, like as if these extraterrestrials, let's call them ETs, I don't know what they are, were almost monitoring their responses to these types of things, and that perhaps they weren't actually going to happen, but they were just being monitored. What do you think?
Well, I've experienced similar, and I go into it in quite a bit of detail in my book. There was about 250 of us, and I think it was an underground base, and there was a large curved screen out in front of us on a low dais, and a grey, senior grey, and a human were out in front of us communicating with us. And they warned us that they were going to show us something in quick time. And that's a term, I know it's a modern term that they talk about these days in terms of IT, but I was using that a long time ago to describe the rapid telepathy or rapid imagery that they could project to you. So we were warned we were going to see something that would be traumatic. We were to prepare ourselves for that. Well, I don't know how you can prepare yourself other than to try to compose yourself in some way with an expectation. And they began putting images on the screen about one every 3 or 4 seconds, and that was okay. They were fairly tragic images that you might see of floods or devastation, etc. And then they began to just speed them up a little, and as they sped them up a little, the images became more intense in terms of what they were conveying. There were wars, and there was pretty terrible atrocities happening, chaos on the planet. And they sped them up slowly to the extent that they were just a blur. And Dr. Schild has commented about this in terms of physics on the footnote on the page where I was writing this. They sped them up until it was a blur, but what we were picking up as each image came on for a fraction of a second, we were picking up the frequency of that picture. So we didn't need to see whether it was someone being burnt in a fire or a terrible avalanche coming down on a village or something, or a war. We simply absorbed the horrific intensity of it on some level. And this went on for some time. We were sobbing into that. Nobody took their eyes off the screen. We'd been asked to watch, but tears were running down our faces, and we were riveted, absolutely riveted. And the feeling of mass devastation amongst us, I will never forget. And when this finished, one of the entities stepped forward, and he cast what I described as a blanket over us. So telepathically, he just put out this energy over us that just calmed us all down emotionally. And he said, calm the emotions and allow the mind to think about this logically and objectively without the terrible emotions getting in the way. Acknowledge the emotions, go to the logic of what you're seeing. So we were told that these things would happen in the future. The intensity to which they occurred could be modulated by how much we advance spiritually and evolutionary in terms of our awareness of the unknown or the ET factor in the meantime. Now, that was 2.5 decades ago. And so really we're seeing a lot of those things that they showed in those images happening now, and they've been happening since about just before 2015. They've been beginning to speed up, and they warned us to watch out for when multiple things begin happening in various countries, in a number of countries, multiple countries. So, for example, you might have something like a pandemic, and you might have a natural disaster. And then on top of that, you might have a war taking place, which we've got at the time in one country. And thinking of the eruption, a volcanic eruption in Tonga recently, they had food shortage, water shortage, their communications were cut off, they had a natural disaster happening, they had a tsunami, and they had no housing left. So, and they had COVID. So we've got multiple disasters happening at once, and the ETs warned us that there would come a time where the humanitarian services would not be able to cope, they would just collapse. And it would be every man looking after himself and their neighbour and family. And I think we're in a time of preparation for that now. We can see things speeding up, and things may stop, and there may be a lull for a while, and then away it will go again, but it will get increasingly worse, I believe, until we wake up. Because even now, if we look at the whole pandemic situation, we look at what's happening in Ukraine, etc., we see humans behaving badly, and as the ETs said, humans harming humans on a global scale. They said when you see humans harming humans on a global scale over something massive, you're really on the slipperiest part of the slope, and you can't step back up. You're on the way down. And the only way down is down to hit the bottom and then see some sense and start climbing back up. And I think that's where we are now. Many, many experiencers describe these futuristic, apocalyptic dreams, presentations, viewing on screen on a craft, etc. And I think of my good friend Robert Salas, who was at Malmstrom Air Force Base when the UFO came over and shut down the Minuteman missiles in the late 60s. And now he's an anti-nuclear campaigner, and has very similar ideas to me about what is happening worldwide at the moment, and the slippery slope that we're all slithering on at the moment, because we really are slithering.
What I find really interesting is how these experiences have a flow-on effect in society. So the people who have these experiences are changed. I actually think they evolve to become the change artists from that post-traumatic growth that they go through, many people. But I think we're all going through that at the moment, like you've touched on with, COVID and wars. We've had massive floods here in Australia as well. And there's a lot of natural disasters going on around the planet. And I think next decade is, it's fraught with difficulty, but it seems to be we're in the birth canal of something new coming, I think. And I was doing another podcast with someone else the other day, and she described it as we're on the cosmic rack. We're being stretched, like in medieval times, except it's now in 2022, and we're all being stretched so much. And it makes sense to me that would happen, so that because we can't have the same awareness now as what's going to be necessary in the future. I think we've got to have our consciousness expanded, and it's happening at a rapid rate, because we know, like these last couple of years, we're all going, what next, and you sort of just come up to the surface and take a breath, and then some other calamity happens, or some horrible situation happens. But I think that we're really being stretched very fast and I do feel it does feel like there's an agenda there.
I think so too. Definitely feel that there's an agenda, and that talking about stretching, I think I've said before that ET's described our progress as like a rubber band, because they pick a concept out of your mind that you understand and they use it to illustrate their points. So they picked out a rubber band, and I said some days we've stretched right out here in terms of our development of spirituality, good things happening on the planet that day, and the next day it goes twang and it's back here again, and we have to start building up that stretch again. And we see that happening day by day. And just last week, I think it was, I can't remember for the life of me now where the report came out, but there was a report from United Nations or somewhere like that. I don't think that's quite correct, but a report on the climate and where we're up to in terms of severe weather, etc. And scientists had, in this survey and research, had decided that we're actually past the point of no return now. We are now in the mode of survival and trying to make little things better to assist us. We can make small changes, and we can make environmentally or in whatever way in our personal life a small change, like growing some vegetables or whatever. Sorting out your family and getting everyone cooperating for the greater good. But really that whole statement that came out has been lost in what is happening in the rest of the world at the moment. It's been lost, and everyone's gone, oh yeah, oh well, they said that before, yeah, okay. And nobody takes too much notice of it. But I do think that some years ago, I woke up in tears and said to my husband, I had a contact last night, and they said, we are now past the point of no return. And that was a good 12 years or so ago. So we've been past that point for a long time now. It's only now that we are realizing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to bring it back to the beginning, and to sort of close off here, it's these paranormal experiences, shall we say, and that's just such a wide variety of experiences. They seem to either we stumble upon them, or they're thrust upon us, or they're a side effect of something else, but they expand us. They expand our mind. They expand our view of reality. And I guess that's where we have to start, really, isn't it? To be able to get a good overview of what's coming, and to be able to deal with it.
I think more people are going to experience this because we're in a different vibe now. The whole planet has a different vibe. The frequency's changed. It's like the slippery slope frequency, folks. Now we have to start scrambling and to make improvements, and that's ourselves and everything else. And so our worldview has to change. And if we look back, I look back when I was a kid and a teenager and a young person, and I used to see people who'd in a small town I grew up in who'd passed away, and I knew they'd had a charmed life. You know, they'd nothing really bad had happened. They'd had this really good life, or so it seemed to an outsider looking, but we never know what that person is experiencing and how much they've been willing to share with us. And I think a lot of people now are feeling, with what's coming out worldwide from scientists and the UFO field and science and medicine, I think they're beginning to feel like there is permission. They have permission to start talking about what they've experienced. And in my book, the ET said, when I get to around this age that I'm at now, there'll be en masse, there'll be people coming out of the woodwork feeling like they can talk about their experiences. And that's how we'll do the 100th monkey thing, that might just toss us forward a little bit more and help us out with our understanding of the supernatural, you know, the ET subject, UFOs, and what we call the paranormal, which to many is normal.
Yeah, like Damien Knott said, the paranatural.
Paranatural, yeah.
Yeah. So, closing thoughts from both of you. Anything you'd like to say?
Well, I have hope for the future, because the ETs did not show the end of the world. They said that if you do certain things, that's what you might create. But I am hoping that logic will prevail. I think that it will. But I think we've got some very turbulent times ahead. And even what we're doing tonight, discussing these issues, if that helps 1 or 2 or 3 or 15 people, then that's a very great thing. It's the ripple in the pond.
Yeah, I think we're on the precipice now. That's where we are, you know, with our consciousness. You know, I think we've had a very, very long time to grow, and we've had opportunity. We've been pushed along, and I think now that, you know, I think the biggest one of all, the 2 big ones for me are probably either nuclear war or climate change. They're the things that are going to ultimately thrust us through that canal process that we were talking about before, and hopefully into something that's completely new, a reconstruction of everything. So all these world systems that we have, and the systems of greed and profit over the planet, that's all really going to be put behind us. So that's my hope. Whether we see that come out, and we have a huge role to play in this, and I think that the entities on ETs and from other planes of existence all know that we've got a role to play, and it's time for us to step up and do that.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well said, Ben.
Yes, absolutely. Time for humanity to show up.
Yes.
Oh, well, thanks, Suzy. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Suzy.
It's been a
Great to see you both as usual.
Yeah.
The team.
Yeah, the team. And I'd love to have you back again on the Strange Encounters Down Under show. And if anyone watching this has enjoyed this episode, please remember to like it, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell to make sure you get the notifications when we upload all our programs. And we will see you again, Suzy and Ben. I'll see you again very soon.
Certainly will.
Yes, and until then.
I'll see you tomorrow morning, sure.
Yes, you will.
Across the ocean.
Yes. Until then, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.